So perhaps I'll get started just in the essence of time while we're waiting for the remaining people to join us and tune into this side event. So distinguished guests, Excellencies, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here today for this official side event convened during the second United Nations Global Sustainable Transport Conference. My name is Martha, and I work at the United Nations Global Compact. For those unaware, the UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, having been initiated 20 years ago by the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. We are delighted to be co-hosting this event alongside our colleagues at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs and with the United Nations Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. Our hour-long event today will be focusing on the global maritime transport sector. We will be hearing from companies across the shipping value chain, including large cargo owners, financial institutions, and shipping companies, on how businesses can take action to both decarbonize the global fleet while upholding human rights and respecting decent work. So without further ado, I would like to pass the screen over to my esteemed colleague, Sturla Henriksen, who is the Special Advisor on Ocean at the UN Global Compact, to welcome you all and provide some stage-setting remarks. Sturla, the screen is yours.
So thank you, Martha. Dear friends, a very good morning, afternoon, and evening to you all. And like Martha, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today for this official side event. Our topic for today's discussion is Route to COP26, Accelerating Business Action for Decarbonizing Shipping and Social Responsibility. And this is a critical, vital, and timely discussion, bringing the perspective of the shipping industry into the proceedings of the UN Global Sustainable Transport Conference. Supported by 2 million seafarers, the shipping industry serves as a backbone of the global logistic supply chains. However, the industry is facing urgent environmental and social pressures, and it is imperative that also the shipping industry decarbonizes by 2050 to meet the Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree target. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the fragility of our global logistics supply chains, and nowhere is this felt more strongly than in the international shipping industry. Social and labor conditions in the shipping industry have been spotlighted as COVID-19 restrictions have led to a crew change crisis, leaving hundreds of thousands of seafarers stranded on vessels well beyond the maximum 11-month period. Many of those still stranded on ships almost 2 years later are being denied basic human rights, including access to medical care. And this is why governments need to take urgent action to designate seafarers as key workers and to ensure that crew changes can take place in a safe, secure, and regular manner. But the business community, too, has a role to play, using their leverage to call for political action and to ensure that the respect for human rights is placed at the core of relations with customers and suppliers. The transformative shift required in the shipping industry offers the opportunity not only to decarbonize shipping activities, it also offers unique opportunities to ensure that no one is left behind, that workers are not displaced, and that local communities in developed and developing countries alike can reap the benefits of change. In recognition of the need to converge these environmental and social dialogues, the UN Global Compact last month released a brief as part of our Blue Road to COP26. The brief, called Charting a 1.5 degrees Celsius Trajectory for Maritime Transport, incorporates a human-centered approach to decarbonization, outlining key actions for stakeholders across the shipping industry. Inclusive and transparent social dialogues are necessary to ensure a safe, equitable, and just transition, and to ensure that reskilling, upskilling, and new skilling are supporting and underpinning the gradual shifting in roles, function, and tasks as the transition progresses. Today, we want to showcase the shipping supply chain, including cargo owners and financiers, in driving decarbonization and better working conditions to secure just transition to zero carbon shipping. We also aim to raise ambition and encourage more companies to sign on to initiatives such as the Science-Based Target Initiative and the Getting to Zero Call to Action. So when the eyes of the world turn towards Glasgow for COP26 next month, it will be vital to show how the shipping industry, the backbone of global trade, is taking decisive action. So thank you so much for your kind attention. And now back to you, Martha.
Thank you very much indeed, Sturla. After those stage-setting remarks, I'm delighted to turn the floor over to our esteemed colleague, Catherine Palmer, currently serving as the shipping lead for the COP26 High-Level Climate Action Champions, to expand on expectations for the upcoming milestone COP26 conference. Catherine, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Martha. And I'd like to say what a great pleasure it is to join this event today. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who has joined us. In just over 2 weeks, the world will gather in Glasgow for COP26. And the global shipping sector is essential for a sustainable future, as it meets the demands of both its customers and society, and it provides the backbone of global supply chains. With 80% of trade by volume carried by sea and handled by ports worldwide, and this is all supported by around 2 million seafarers, the interconnectedness of the shipping sector therefore make it a powerful source of solution when leaders step up to take action as they are doing now. Tackling emissions cannot be solved without shipping, and tackling shipping emissions cannot be solved by shipping alone. But it is incredible to see that so many countries and companies are working to speed up shipping's journey to zero emissions by 2050. Just last month, more than 150 industry leaders and organizations representing the entire maritime value chain launched a call to action, calling on world leaders ahead of COP26 to put in place the enabling policy frameworks to decarbonize shipping by 2050 and make zero-emission shipping the default choice by 2030. Leading companies are already taking action, whether that be R&D and pilot projects, to investing in the production of zero-emission fuels and the supporting port infrastructure, and even ordering zero-emission ready vessels. This shows that the private sector is willing and able to keep up with the science, and now shipping urgently needs clear government policies aligned with 1.5 to provide clarity on the direction of travel and urge maritime actors to make the investments needed. It is only by engaging the full value chain in radical collaboration and partnership between and across sectors of the global economy we can deliver immediate action that is required to achieve the 5% zero carbon fuels by 2030, which is a critical tipping point to put shipping on course for zero. At COP26, we will focus on 4 key themes: increased ambition, adaptation and resilience, mobilizing finance, and working together to operationalize the ambition and accelerate progress. For shipping, the implications are clear. Zero-emission ships and green fuel technology will need to be trialed and demonstrated at large scale. We need to ensure safety standards are in place and those learnings are shared, and ultimately encourage larger supply that will bring down the costs. The approach to ship financing will need to evolve, with stronger adoption of ESG standards and a clear risk-sharing framework. An investment structure around longer maturity periods will be needed. Policy is also needed to close the gap between zero-emission fuels and fossil fuels, and to provide certainty on the direction of travel. And finally, we need a transition approach that is equitable and just for each and everyone on the planet, especially those that are most vulnerable to climate change and the global economy transition, such as emerging economies, less developed countries, and small island developing states. There will be jobs that will require upskilling and reskilling to ensure that no one is left behind. So a fair, equitable, and just transition for both people, countries, and regions will demonstrate to society that the shipping industry is intent on taking a leading role in the just, healthy, and resilient transition to a zero carbon world. So the 2020s must be a decisive decade. I look forward to hopefully seeing many people at COP26 and having dialogue around these key issues for the shipping sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine, for those clear instructions for urgent and immediate action, and particularly around the need for a fair and equitable just transition. With that, I would like to open the panel discussion and welcome our panelists on screen, inviting them to turn on their cameras. And I'd also very much like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Ms. Ingrid Irigoyen, who is the Associate Director for Ocean and Climate within Aspen Institute for Energy and Environment. She is also the Director of the Aspen Institute Shipping Decarbonization Initiative. Ingrid, many thanks for leading these fruitful discussions, and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you all to the hosts for having me and for focusing on this very important topic as part of the UN Sustainable Transport Conference. I think it's particularly important that you're focusing on maritime decarbonization and human rights and the interconnectedness of those two issues right now. And Catherine, you've laid out very nicely for us a vision for what an equitable and just transition might look like in this space. And it really is just a critical topic for us today. Sterling, you've rightly pointed out that shipping has been certainly brought into our consciousness, not just as professionals, but as everyday people in a way that it never really has before. And that's, because of disruptions. It's not in the headlines necessarily for good reasons these days. But there is a silver lining, I think, here, and it is that people are now paying attention to maritime shipping in a way that they never have even been aware how important it was to their lives before. And I think this does give us an opportunity to accelerate the pace of change. It also means that there are challenges sometimes to accelerating that change right now, but I like to focus on the positive opportunity that this presents. And I'm so thrilled to have such a wonderful panel here today to reflect on these issues, to share with us what they are doing, their perspectives on what we should be doing next to address these issues. And so I see that they've joined us here on screen. Thank you very much. And I'll just very briefly sort of introduce everyone and then turn to an opening question and kind of call on each of our panelists to answer that opening question for us. So, so very briefly, who we have with us today, we have Ms. Michelle Gross, Vice President for Global Logistics with Unilever. We have Mr. Stephen Cotton, who's the General Secretary for International Transport Workers Federation, or ITF. We have Ms. Elizabeth Munk of Rosenschild, Global Sustainability Manager for IKEA. Hello, Elizabeth. Mr. Peter Jonathan Jameson, partner with the Boston Consulting Group. Mr. Kang Sin Chu, Managing Director for Shipping Finance at Standard Chartered. And Mr. Simon Bennett, General Manager for Sustainable Development at the Swire Shipping Company. So welcome to all of our panelists. I'd like to start our conversation today by looking at shipping through this dual lens of climate and human rights, and ask each of you, and I'll call on you in turn, to share with us why you think these issues are important, your thoughts on the intersection of these issues, the fact that we're sort of dealing with the two of these issues right now, and what an opportunity and what a challenge that presents. And then tell us a little bit about what your organization is currently doing in this space. The reason that you've been invited to be with us today is because you are making progress, and we'd like to hear what are some of those areas of progress and what do you think is still remaining to be done. So we'll turn to each of you to share some of those thoughts. And then as time remains, I have a few sort of specific additional follow-up questions that we can turn to after that. So why don't we start? I'd like to start with Peter from BCG. Peter, you have a broad lens on these issues from a variety of sectors and a variety of different roles that you play in this space. So we'd love to start with your general perspectives on this issue.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ingrid, and hello, good morning, afternoon, and midday to all of you. So yeah, at BCG, we very much look at this from, I would say, a total societal impact lens. And what do I mean now? I mean the collaboration really between the business and the corporate world and then society. And we're very much in the belief, and what we see as positive outcomes coming from the collaborations that are happening is when those two lenses work together. And that for me really then transcends down into the topic around decarbonisation and human rights. And it's really this intersection that we can see when it's solved, and when it's solved in the right way, it's done through system level thinking. So not one player alone, but the whole system itself. And I think what's really interesting about this topic at the moment, these two coming together, is that human rights has always been a top material topic for shipping companies. And as we can see now, particularly in the discussions that we're having, is that actually the two need to go completely together. We see those that are already vulnerable becoming more vulnerable as a result of climate change. We can also see this shift in concern around the shift in jobs and skills that are going to be required. And companies are already thinking now 5-10 years ahead, what is it that I'm going to do to be able to make sure that I upskill my workforce to be able to deal with this new future that is a decarbonised world. And ultimately the discussions that are happening now and happening quicker than ever is this topic around resilience, and it's resilience of that ecosystem of both human rights and decarbonisation that are now starting to come together. So I think we're at a perfect point. COVID has obviously amplified the challenges in the industry, but what we do see, and that's a lot of the work that BCG is involved in at the moment, is this system level thinking around collaborations, because these two topics do need absolutely come together. You can't have one without the other.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the systems approach is so incredibly important and also so difficult. I often reflect on the capacity of the human mind to sort of retain information, particularly when it doesn't necessarily specifically relate to your day job in that moment, and how challenging that is. And we certainly need all of the good tools and methods to be able to address things at that level. Why don't we turn now to Stephen from ITF and hear some of your perspectives on decarbonization, on this transition, how it can be just, and in particular focusing on what's been happening with seafarers in the last couple of years, and sort of your perspectives on progress that we're making and what still remains to be done.
Thanks, Ingrid, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to be on a fantastic panel. Going straight to the questions, I think I'm going to be quite straightforward. We can't achieve climate justice without labour justice, and I think that's the conversation that's been highlighted throughout the COVID pandemic. And of course, there's the question of how do our seafarers, and our seafarers are from all over the world, and what's their role to play. So I think first we have to look at transportation. And particularly the challenge for the industry is that transportation, whichever part of the supply chain, has become too cheap. And the shortages we're all now facing is a direct correlation between deregulation, subcontracting, and certain spaces exploration. And I think if we all look at our global economy, pay and conditions, and therefore safety, have also fallen below the standards I think we all aspire to. So there's some challenges throughout that process as well. And we've seen particularly with the growth of gig economy, exploitation of labour, moving around the globe trying to find the cheapest alternative, has given us more and more challenges. And I think throughout COVID, I think we need to kind of go back to some of our principles. So quality training, occupational safety and health, and decent work throughout that process. And I think, I'm here representing 20 million transport workers, but we can do better. In the seafaring labour supply, it's only 1.28% are women. How can that possibly be okay in 2021? The conversation about supply chains just in time, the gaps in corporate responsibility, and of course what we've learned, and we're working with many of the colleagues that are in the Global Compact to look at the due diligence when it comes to their supply chains. And I don't think we could have had a more crude explosion of media about how challenged we are, and let's talk a little bit about what's been going on. So we're working with many of the multinationals to look at their supply chains. New pockets of legislation about human rights due diligence, which for us means trade union rights, freedom of representation. Trade unions has seen lots of initiatives, and we're in a unique position as trade unions if we can understand the dynamics of change, but also the fact that we need to add the human voice and that element to to the solutions. So shipping in cents today, there's 1.7 million. The ITF represents over 1 million of those seafarers. Shipping and the group of tripartite ship owners, we've got a fantastic history of working together and solving problems, and we are truly a global organization and a global industry. So the question is, why did we have at some stages so many seafarers stuck on ships? So I think if we explore the numbers, out of that 1.7, we had 400,000 over contracts on board ships and 400,000 waiting to go to ships throughout the process. We've lobbied with many of you to convince governments, and particularly our friends in the Global Compact, to recognise the consequences of decisions that close national borders. But ultimately that challenge has highlighted for us how we have to collaborate even more. The conversation about what solutions look like have to be made on the fact that our seafarers have kept those supply chains going. Many of you have seen shortages in truck drivers and other areas. Those are the issues that are a direct impact by the fragile nature of our supply chains. So we in the ITF think we have to be party to the transition when it comes to a just transition. We need to be in a position to use human rights due diligence and those challenges to supplement the processes in place. And we think it's critical that unions take their seat at the table and sit down with the different stakeholders. And we are also producing our sustainable shipping policy in time for COP, which has been a challenge, let's make no mistake, because seafarers don't quite see exactly why these big issues are impacting them, yet they're the ones that are dealing with the ferocious impact in the seas and the dynamics of the changing space. So for us, it's critical that we represent the voice, that we work with the partners that are here, that we start to make solutions that deal with how can we educate seafarers why green jobs, the environment is their problem, how we then translate that from our industry partners beyond just the ship owners, because this is a massive financial commitment, into a position where we can make global standards, and global standards that will impact and encourage, dare I say, more women into the shipping industry and more opportunities. So for us, this isn't just climate change. I'll come back in more detail on climate, I hope, if I get another opportunity, Ingrid. But the reality is we're here to be part of the process and frankly, be part of the solution. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, I think you've really reminded us of, I think for many of us who work in the climate space, you know, we care about planet Earth in large part because we love people, because we love humanity, and because we want human beings to be able to thrive in this precious nest that we call planet Earth. And it's so essential to account for the well-being of the people who are directly involved in this industry so that we can, you know, get their help and support as part of this transition. We need that. We need everyone to be pulling in the same direction. And so we have to center them as part of this discussion, and standards and all of those things that you've described are such an important component of that. So thank you for sharing that, and happy to come back to the climate change. Would love to hear more of your thoughts on that. For now, let's turn to Simon from Spire, please.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. From memory, your two questions were why are we here, and what are we doing? The why is pretty easy. We're 150 years old next year, and we've always believed in doing the right thing, but we were actually instructed by the chairman 32 years ago formally that we should always look at doing the right thing, even ahead of legislation, even if it costs more money, both from the point of view of the general public good and enlightened self-interest. So that's both socially and environmentally. We seek to be one of the leaders. We are a member of the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, and we signed up to the GTZ call to action with 150 odd other organizations. We're a strategic partner with the Maersk Center in Copenhagen, and we're looking at other partnerships. We made a commitment to be at net zero as a shipping company by or before 2050. That was the easy bit. That didn't take long to write. The difficult bit is to actually get there. And over the next year or so, we'll be mapping out the roadmap to be doing stuff physically, getting boats out there, beginning to do that by 2030, and getting to the goal by 2050. We have to move. If we don't move, then we'll find that shippers aren't using us, so we'll cease to exist, and society won't approve of us, and that won't be good either. So that's enlightened self-interest, but it's doing the right thing. We've got 14 trade routes in the Pacific, joining the islands up, and unfortunately, a percentage of those will not exist by 2050 unless we do what we can. 2 degrees won't cut it. We need to be down at no more than a 1.5 degree rise. And even then, some of them are at great risk. So our key stakeholders need us to be with them. We supported the Solomon Islands and the Marshall Islands in their submission for the last MEPC. And we are hoping to see a lot of progress in that area, introducing market-based measures at the next MEPC in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, my personal view is that there are a number of my peers out there in the shipping sector, and there are 60,000 deep sea ships out there whose decision-making is heavily impacted by hitting their wallet. There are some leaders and there are those who will be dragged along. So we are supportive of market-based measures. The Marshall Islands suggested starting at $100 per ton of carbon and moving to $250. That's good for us. The question is asked of me, well, who's going to pay for this? Society is paying at the moment. Everyone on this panel and everyone in the audience, you are paying indirectly the costs of global warming. What will happen when we have market-based measures is it'll move from indirect to direct, and you can then see that your 6 cents on a pair of sneakers, $1.50 on a laptop, that is the direct cost of introducing these measures. But it has to be done. We can't avoid doing it. We've got a number of other small projects on the go. The vessel behind me is an artist's impression. We hope to sign the contract for this in the next 3 weeks or so for a low carbon, low cost, low tech, sail assisted cargo vessel for the Pacific. This will go to islands without an established port infrastructure. And the small islands in the Pacific, much like the Shetlands and the Orkneys in the UK, if you're familiar with those, they depopulate with youngsters because they cannot get, there's no cash crop, there's no real economy there. So they all head off to the big city. So there's a social benefit as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions. 30% of Fiji's GDP is spent on importing fuel for aircraft, cars, and ships. Anything that we can do to reduce that is of economic benefit to the Pacific Island communities, and it's a social benefit as well. That's probably 4 minutes worth. I've got a lot more stuff here that we are doing. I'll leave that for later time, later questions maybe.
Thank you, Simon. And thank you in particular for highlighting the Getting to Zero call to action. That's an important initiative that went public just a few weeks ago. It helps draw attention, it helps clarify ambition, it describes some steps that are needed. I think over 150 companies have joined that. So any companies that are on the line today that haven't yet, I would encourage you to take a look at that call to action and participate. And Simon, also just appreciating your encouragement to your peers and competitors to join you in supporting high ambition proposals at the IMO. There are important meetings happening in these coming weeks, and certainly industry support will be important. Also, your point about the expectations of customers, the shipping industry's customers, is an excellent segue to our next panelists here. And I want to turn to them and just emphasize the role of both finance and cargo owners, and how we just simply cannot or overstate the leverage that they have to help us drive change. So I'd like to now turn to a couple of cargo owners that are really leading in this space. And as I do that, I'll share my observation that there is increasing interest among cargo owners in general in reducing both the environmental and social impacts of maritime shipping, and ensuring that as we look to the future, we have a clean and equitable and just maritime shipping industry going forward that they so intimately rely on to get their goods to market. And so that increasing interest is something that we've been trying to harness at the Aspen Institute. We're creating a new initiative called Cargo Owners for Zero Emission Vessels. We've developed that initiative in collaboration with cargo owners. We don't have much public about it yet, but stay tuned. We'll be announcing our first major initiative in the coming days. So let me now turn to IKEA and Unilever to hear your perspectives on both of these issues, the decarbonization of shipping and the human rights component, both of which you are involved with. Particularly your thoughts on, how do those intersect with one another? How do you view that as shipping customers? What does this mean for ESG leading companies like yourselves? And how do you kind of see the future of this playing out? And I'd love to hear first from Michelle from Unilever, if that's all right with you.
That works for me as long as my internet signal holds up. So thank you very much for having me on the call. And I also just wanted to celebrate you for pulling together a very broad panel, because I think it's paramount and critical that we are looking across the entire value stream, because we as shippers cannot do it alone. Just in the same way that the carriers cannot, and so we all must collaborate together. I think the responsibility of the cargo owner is huge. There are so many things that, not only from the perspective of where we have leverage and the ability to actually put contracts against what we believe in terms of values, but also because we are the ones that are producing the emissions. And just to share a couple of statistics, and hopefully, Elizabeth, you don't mind me calling you out, because I think between the two of us, we're probably the two largest single shippers in the industry together. And maritime freight represents 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. For Unilever specifically, at any given point in time, we have 1,500 containers on the water. And we represent 15%, logistics represents 15% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a tremendous responsibility to do something different and to get to zero, not even decarbonize, but to get to zero. So there are a number of things that we are doing today. And obviously the easiest one for us to focus on is our operational efficiencies. Where can we reduce waste in our processes, look to maximize as much efficiency as we can in consolidating as many shipments as possible. But more significantly than that, I'm starting to convert into alternate fuels and investing in zero emission fleet in partnership with those carriers is significant. And we have to provide that signal in order for the investors, whether it's financial investors, it's the carriers, to understand where to make those investments. And we are willing to put our money where our mouth is. We are willing, and we are already actively reviewing and revising our contracts to reflect what is part of our company's core purpose and values, which is making sustainable living commonplace. So these are really important things for us, in addition to participating in a number of advisory boards and having an active voice as a cargo owner to help reshape the way that we are defining those science-based definitions and measures for all of us to look at and be held accountable in terms of the way that we are reducing our carbon emissions.
Excellent. And thank you for highlighting both the new fuels and the fuel efficiency component, because I think we all understand that the new zero carbon fuels will cost a little bit more in the beginning, in particular, until there's appropriate policy support to sort of get us to price parity. There will be a cost differential, and we need to use those fuels as efficiently as possible. And so, Simon, appreciating the image behind you of the sail assisted vessel, there's so much innovation in this space that we can be harnessing and sort of accelerating. So appreciating your focus on that.
And Ingrid, there's just one other point I wanted to leave before I transition over to Elizabeth. I think it's very important, and several of you have already referenced this. We've been looking at the investment from a cost perspective for so long. And not only is there a cost to the planet when we do that, but there is the cost to people in addition to that. And we have to start to look at our role as the advocates for looking at the cost of the planet, the cost to people and planet when we're making decisions, not only for now, but for the next 5, 10, 20 plus years.
Amen. Elizabeth, could we turn to you, please?
Sure. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. So to your question, Ingrid, yes, the interconnectedness is clear, and the disruptions due to the pandemic are continuing, and global supply chains are stretched to their limits with an impact on people and as well as emissions. And I really believe it's important that we do not let these disruptions get us off track, that we really continue to navigate through this perfect storm with our clear climate and human rights compass. And in IKEA, we are guided by our people and planet positive strategy, where we have 3 pillars. It's about healthy and sustainable living, creating a movement to enable a healthy and sustainable life at home. It's about climate positive and circularity, working towards becoming climate positive throughout our IKEA value chain by 2030 and transform IKEA into circular business. And also about the 3rd pillar is the fair and equal, being an inclusive business, ensuring diversity and decent work. And to us, these are completely interconnected. And if we look specifically, I'm working with sustainability in our supply chain operations, where we are responsible for the transportation, the global transportation of home furnishing products from our suppliers to the warehouses and stores. And we have an ambitious climate target. And in order for us to reach our targets, ocean shipping is very important. And today, the ocean shipping accounts for approximately 40% of the emissions from our transportation in IKEA, the long haul transportation in IKEA, and 60% comes from the land transportation. And for us, the long haul transportation climate footprint is about 5% of the total IKEA footprint. So ocean stands for about 2% of the total carbon footprint, which might seem small in this context, but we are a big shipper, and as such, we have a big responsibility and also a great opportunity to influence, and that we want to use.
Excellent. Well, we certainly appreciate that spirit and agree that you have tremendous ability to help drive change in this space. So Mr. Kang-Sin Chu from Standard Charter, finance plays such an essential role in all of this, and I'd love to hear your views on climate and human rights issues and what it is that you're doing to address them and how you see the role of finance in this.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, and it's a pleasure to be here amongst very esteemed panelists. I think from Standard Charter's perspective, just to answer the first question, why is it important to us? Similar to Simon, we are a bank firmly embedded in the emerging markets. We have a long history in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And this is my home in particular as well, where my family and my friends live. So it is personally important for me and my organization for us to do something about this. As Catherine highlighted, emerging market economies have less money to invest in climate mitigation strategies and have lower levels of climate readiness, and therefore they are the most exposed to climate change and extreme weather conditions. So, it's imperative for us, and this is firmly in our purpose as a bank in driving prosperity and commerce in this particular region. We see ourselves as facilitator of capital, and as Simon pointed out, the conversations that we've been having with our clients and our internal management teams are to look beyond just at the P&L. What is the cost of climate risk, and what are our clients doing to address this? We have come out front and center to launch a transition strategy, very clearly committing to align ourselves to the net zero aspirations by 2050 and more aspirational targets to our operations to be net zero by 2030. So there are, we are looking at specific industries and how each individual industry is playing their part in this transition process. We recognize that this is a complicated solution for various industries and added the complexity to the geographies that we operate in. And therefore, each problem in each particular industry will require a unique solution. I mean, I've worked very closely with Peter and BCG team, and we were discussing this a couple of weeks back, that collaboration is required for shipping to transition. And this goes beyond just shipping. A large proportion of the investments required in shipping happens onshore in the oil and gas space, and in requirements to set up the supply chain to provide the alternative fuels for us to transition, to move to the next catalyst. And that's something that we are looking, speaking actively within, Standard Chartered, where I'm speaking to my colleagues in the oil and gas industry, to metals and mining, to retail, and trying to see how we can collaborate and align ourselves cohesively to provide a comprehensive solution to the challenges faced. To your question in regards to the impact of human rights, I think we see this front and center given our presence in Asia, where a large proportion of seafarers are from, and that's why our human rights statement includes compliance with key international principles like the UN Guiding Principles and requirements that give project affected people an avenue to have their voices heard and their needs addressed. Specific to shipping, I call again sustainable shipping initiatives that we work very closely across the supply chain with Simon and his colleagues and peers. And we are actually actively working with them to design a charter on seafarers' rights that we will be encouraging our clients to embrace in the future. So, there is a lot more, we can go into detail, but, I'm happy to kind of be keen to hear what my esteemed panelists have to say on this as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I did have one quick follow-up question for you, and maybe I'll lob two questions in your direction, and you can take whichever one you like. One question is about sort of ship financing for shipping and access to green finance. And sort of how do you think we're doing in shipping relative to other spaces? Are there lessons that we can learn from other spaces that sort of point to additional steps that should be taken for the finance industry to take decarbonization, to take human rights better into account? And then my other question would be, what kind of demand signals does finance need to see from cargo owners and others in the supply chain in order to help take those next steps that you think are important?
I think let me address the first question on how we're doing from a green financing perspective. I think let me highlight what we are doing well at this stage. I think from a shipping perspective, the role that IMO is playing and the various industry leaders are coming up to set standards. I think as an industry, we are doing better than we're doing well by setting very clear and transparent standards that many can follow. Right? This is a fragmented industry where there are over 100,000 maritime ships. It's very easy to think of shipping as the vessels that bring your cabinets and your containers for Christmas, but it is also vessels that bring your grain and gas, as well as people across long and short distances. So, and these ply out across the emerging markets, established nations, where there are different flag states, different country regulations that play a different role. So I think that's where we're doing slightly better, than other industries where there are clear standards, and I do hear conversations that we can do better, we need to do more, and that's where private sector comes into play as well. I think Poseidon Principle is one good example where we signed up this year in April, one of the first emerging markets to join a consortium of banks to set more aggressive standards for ship financing that clearly outlines, our clients' transition goals and keep them accountable for where they want to get to. So I think that helps. Where I think we can be doing better from a green financing perspective is that as an industry as a whole, it is 3% of greenhouse gas. I mean, as a country, if you look at it as a country's perspective, we're somewhere between Germany and Japan. But if you boil it down to an asset perspective, it's one vessel. And it is I have to say less sexy compared to decarbonizing a coal mine or a power plant, because the carbon impact might not be as substantial. So if you're looking at private investors coming in and say, look, what's my carbon impact if I were to put $1 into this? It might not attract as much attention. I think that's something that we can do better in encouraging investors both on the capital, on the equity side and on the debt side to say, look, investments need to move for us to start the process. And whilst there's a lot of conversations on the different technologies that will get us there and the readiness, I think one of the conversations that I have with many of our clients to say, look, let's not have perfect get in the way of good, perfection get in the way of good, and we need to start now. To your second question in regards to human rights in finance, I think that's something that is increasingly a stronger focus given the news that is hitting us closer to home in Singapore. This was a conversation that we had with the Maritime Port Authorities here in Singapore to see what we can do to provide vaccinations priorities for seafarers that stop here and what we can do to facilitate crew change. And I think that sets a standard and creates sets a standard for others to follow through, where you don't have to think you don't have to worry. Someone has already kind of done the homework and said, look, let's see how we can replicate and carry this out as quickly as possible. I think we can do better. It requires a lot more conversations across the supply chain, and I think this is a fantastic avenue to have that.
Fantastic, thank you. Stephen, I wanted to give you a chance to come back and say a little bit more about decarbonization in particular, and I invite you to share perspectives as you wish, but I did have one specific question. So take my specific question or share the remaining thoughts that you had in mind. And my question is related to the use of new fuels and looking ahead to new fuels like the hydrogen-derived fuels and the pretty urgent need for global standards to guide their production and transportation, safe use on board. How do you think that we can best incorporate issues of seafarer safety into those global standards as they're being developed? What kind of efforts are needed? We need to make sure that we're doing right by the environment, but we also need to make sure that we're doing right by people. And of course, that we are enabling an economically viable transition that's going to, none of it, matters if it's not actually going to work in the real world. So share just some of your perspectives with us, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, thanks. That's a super question. I think it goes back to the point about how do we communicate and what do we expect of the professionals in the maritime space. So for us, it's what are the alternatives and how are we going to take the people that have been serving us heroically through the pandemic on a path that continues to deal with the challenges. So whatever alternative fuel you use, it's going to change the power of a ship and the engine room and the existing skills. So these are the simple parts that we have to respond to. And of course, we think we should be at the table talking about that. There may be significant health and safety challenges depending which of the alternate fuels you use. And ammonia is not the easiest potential fuel to transport around the world and comes with a lot of inherent personal risks. And those are things we need to talk about, and we need to work out standards. I think part of the conversation will also be, again, it's impacted by cost. We've got shipping down to very low crewing numbers, and the conversation about what will be these alternatives and what do we need to put in place. And those are conversations, it's not just from the union's perspective, it's Simon mentioned the cost element. And of course, every stakeholder needs to make a return on their investment, but it's how do you define the argument? We support the idea that the consumer has to pay more, but the issue of safe operations is kind of critical. What is the training standards we see? And our colleagues from Singapore have been leading in this debate in ESG. A lot of shipping has moved to the global south for its recruitment of its personnel, but you will need to invest in all of the infrastructure. And it's not a 5-minute job to build a new training course to work with an alternative fuel. These things need proper investment. And again, we want to be part of that conversation. We mentioned it and we continue to mention it. And our colleagues at the IMO throughout this pandemic have tried really hard, but it's also highlighted sometimes the weakness of the system. Certain governments, certain flag states have limited ability to make game-changing decisions. And again, I think our colleagues at the end of the supply chain have sometimes more power than governments to convince people we have to make these changes. So we have to, in my personal opinion, empower IMO to be more bold, encourage them, find the governments that are supporting the climate challenge and make them take up the challenge and bring that debate, dare I call it a battle, onto the floor of the IMO, because we need a global standard. We know there's geopolitics linked to all of this debate, but we have to have the coalition of the willing leading from the front and ensuring that the Filipino seafarer doesn't lose out, but there may be opportunities for new jobs for the global, and you know, I come back to the point, and I won't take too much time, we need more women in our industry, and we need to convince young people that transportation that has kept the world going through the pandemic, we've had a clear sign, a warning sign that we must do more and we must do it better. So for us in the ITF, we want to be in partnership with all of you, and we want to take the lessons we've learned over these last 20 painful months to make sure our UN bodies are brave enough to take the challenge. And if we can't get them to do it, we have to challenge the government through COP itself to take a more stringent position. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And yes, we need more women in the maritime industry, and we need it to be a safe and supportive place to work, and that will bring more women into the industry. And it's by working together that we can create that kind of culture. I think you also touched on something very important, which is, you know, the role of the cargo owner voice in helping drive some of these policy changes, and that, you know, we haven't had sort of the right opportunities yet for cargo owners to weigh in that way. And, you know, those of you who are cargo owners, shippers in this space, you know, you create a lot of jobs and you're very important in the countries where you operate. And so finding the right opportunities, recognizing how much you have on your plates already, and, you know, and how many policy arenas you're already involved, but, you know, exploring what might be ways to elevate the cargo owner voice in these discussions is something that we at the Aspen Institute are very interested in doing, and look forward to having more dialogue about that. And speaking of cargo owners, I'd love to, you know, Michelle or Elizabeth, if there are, you know, specific sort of tools that you've been working on, you know, under the UN Global Compact sort of toolkit, you know, auditing toolkits for supply chains, or, you know, standard setting efforts, environmental due diligence assessments, things like very specific sort of tactics that you have been thinking about. Would love to hear a little bit more detail about that, sort of, again, coming back to that role that you play at the end of the supply chain and really helping to drive and inspire a lot of the change that's needed. Did either one of you want to weigh in on that? I'm sort of lobbing it to both of you, but happy to have one of you unmute and take a shot at it.
Sure, happy to go first. I'll leave you some time, Elizabeth. So certainly, I think the fastest and easiest thing that we're doing that is probably most significant is mapping our current network and understanding exactly who do we have, who are we partnered with, and whether or not they meet our standards. So the toolkit has been very important for us to have that clear guideline of what good and what right looks like for us, that matches not only our purpose and our value, but the longer term ambition. So mapping our network and aligning and realigning and making very critical decisions around those suppliers that will continue to be in our network and those that will not, based on their commitment to sustainable living. I think the other thing is that there is still a lot of work to be done when it comes to making end-to-end decisions. And there's been a lot of discussions around the P&L, a lot of discussions around cost and those trade-off pieces. And I think it's absolutely paramount that we move away from that methodology, not to say that each of those components are not important, but getting to that right balance, but also looking at our role and our responsibility to educate the consumers so that they understand that the behaviors and the choices that they are making are equally having an impact that creates this incredible headwind that is difficult for us to offset. No pun intended on offsets. So really important that we're elevating our voice, not only within this community, but also to our customers and to the consumers, and sharing with much more transparency based on the data itself, what happens to the cost based on their behaviors.
Great. Elizabeth, did you want to chime in on
Yeah,
this?
sure. The toolkit, absolutely, super important, very relevant. We are working closely with our code of conduct, IWAY, the IKEA way of working. And I think during this pandemic also is to have the continuous dialogues with our service providers on these types of topics is super important. And also reflecting upon the transformation that is going to take place, we need to ensure a holistic perspective, assessing the consequences and potential opportunities for people during the transformation journey to decarbonize ocean shipping. Because in every business decision we make and in the continuous dialogues with our partners, we need to make sure that this just transition perspective is included. And we need to make sure we do not negatively impact, but instead contribute to building these resilient societies.
Absolutely. So we've only got a few minutes left, and I did have one last question, and it's a request to our panelists for a word of advice. So there are a lot of initiatives in this space that are working to build collaboration. Really, I think it's heartening to see how much work is now being done in this space. We have the Getting to Zero Coalition doing the important work that we referenced earlier, the Poseidon Principles, the UN Global Compact working in the space, the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, the Institute for Human Rights in Business. We now have COSEV working to work specifically with cargo owners on high ambition. And of course, there are so many other valued partners in the space that I didn't name, but there's a lot of working together happening, which is exciting. For those of us like me who are managing some of that collaboration, we'd love to hear your thoughts as supply chain actors at sort of almost every single one of the key nodes that we have represented here. You know, what advice would you have for us on how we can better enable you to work together on very concrete, specific projects? You know, I think we're starting to come together around the ambition. We understand what are some of the dimensions of this issue that we need to be focusing on, but now we need to really actualize that. And so what are, if you have any words of advice for us on how can we better serve you in bringing you together around specific projects, would love to hear your thoughts, and just throw your hand up and if you have a comment, and I'll go ahead and call on you, and let's keep it brief because we do only just have a couple of moments left. Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. I think this about collaboration is across the industry, across the value chain. It's crucial to develop, to invest, to deploy, to scale up solutions, and we need a portfolio of solutions. And I think today there is a sort of consensus that in the industry that collaboration is necessary to solve the problems. And the good thing about talking and aligning about the need for collaboration is that it creates a confidence across the industry that this is the direction, because we need more concrete projects. We need to slice the elephant. We need more lighthouse projects and innovation projects and pilots. And the confidence on the direction is needed across the industry to really embark on this transformation journey and to make the necessary investments. So I think it's not enough that we talk about collaboration. We need to do collaboration.
Absolutely. So I saw Stephen, Simon, and then Kang, and I would ask you if you could just keep it to just a few seconds, and then I'll hand it back to Martha and we can wrap up. Stephen.
Yes, I'll be very quick. Elizabeth, I couldn't agree more with you. I think it's how do we translate to working men and women to visualize what we're actually talking about. So it has to be models, it has to be partnership. And this COVID pandemic's proven to us cooperation and collaboration is the only way forward. So sharing and delivering for us, how can we be part of that program?
Fantastic. Simon?
We absolutely have to work together. We're on the third shift now. We've moved from sail to steam, coal and steam to diesel, and we're now moving from diesel to some other fuel. It's a massive issue. No one person, even Maersk itself doesn't have the answer. It's formed up a collaborative center. So no one's going to find it on their own. We need to work together because it's urgent.
Okay.
Hi, I definitely mirror that, and I think it, highlighting my point again, and we just need to get started and get right on it. Right? The transition, there will not be one perfect solution. The transition starts yesterday, and we all need to play our part in this transition process. And like the saying goes, I said earlier, let's not have perfect get in the way of good.
Absolutely. All right, Peter, the last word in just a few seconds.
Yeah, I think my point is that there are so many collaborations going on and partnerships are starting to form. I think we need to use the power of the masses to influence state regulators, to also influence the end consumers as well. there's a big voice here. Let's use the voice to influence the ecosystem.
Excellent, absolutely. It's going to take all of us, including the consumer, to be supportive of the cargo owners that want to make the change, that then need the carriers to make the change, that need the fuel producers to produce the fuel, and all of that needs to be financed. And so it's all, in the end, all of us together working on this. So Martha, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you again for the opportunity to moderate this fantastic panel, and I'll leave it to you to close us out.
No, thank you, Ingrid. Thank you so much. I'm still so excited. You can see from my face, that was such an exciting, interesting panel all around, system level collaboration, lots of amazing quotes, yeah, in all of the panels. So thank you so much for participating today. There will be a YouTube video which we'll upload shortly after this. So for all those who have people that weren't able to tune in, we'll be making that available afterwards, including also a short summary of the piece. I just also want to thank UNDESA and the High Level Climate Action Champions, Catherine Palmer, for supporting this event, for participating in this event. And yeah, we look forward to the discussions coming up. COP26 is only 3 weeks away. And so good that we're having these discussions now. And so with that, thank you to all those that have tuned in. Thank you once again to you, Ingrid, and wishing everyone a pleasant morning, afternoon, and evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.